Okay, we have 3 chapters left. 10 is functions, 11 is arrays or lists, and 12 is files. So I'm going to do them out of order. I'll do 11 first because the assignment is on arrays. And functions are not that important, but they're useful for the test. So I'll come back to 10, but I'll do 11 and 12 first, okay? So even though we call it arrays, Python has lists, which are almost the same thing. So we are going to study them in some detail, but from 7 onwards, they're not that important. 2-dimensional, multi-dimensional arrays are not that important. Okay, let's start with this. So an array is basically a collection of similar items, same type of data. And we'll come to an example very shortly. In pseudocode, you write the name of the array and the number of elements. For example, 10 would be the size of the array. And the values if you want to initialize those 10 items. Yes?
Do we have to generate the values, or do we just...
Either way. For this assignment, you have to generate the values. I'm coming to the assignment after this chapter is over. Okay? Remind me. Okay, so here's an example. Suppose you want to initialize an array of size 12. Obviously, there are 12 months, right? And put in January, February, March, April, up to December in it. So in pseudocode, not in Python. Python, this won't work. I'll come back to Python later, if necessary. So what this says is, give me 12 identical storage spots, number 1 or number 0 through 11. Let's call them 0 through 11 to be consistent with Python. Number 0 is going to be January. Number 1 is going to be February. Please note the syntax. These are curly brackets with commas separating the values. And it's just pseudocode. This is totally invalid in Python. Okay, we'll come to Python examples in a few minutes. Any questions so far? And then can you work with that array once you've initialized it? This initialization, just like an assignment statement basically. And there's a picture of that. Month sub 0 is going to be Jan, that's how we initialize. Month sub 11 is December, and there are 12 entries, right? 0 through 11 is 12 entries. Any questions so far? Okay.
Is that the Python?
No, this pseudocode still.
Okay.
But in Python, we can build the same structure, by the way. Okay? It's called a list rather than an array, but it works very similarly. I'll come to the examples in Python in a few minutes. So again, this I'll skip because it's self-check. Suppose you want to initialize them all with zeros. The size is 3. Final grade sub 0 will be 0. Final grade sub 1 will be 0. Final grade sub 2 will be 0. There is no final grade sub 3. Is that clear? Because the 3 entries already done, 0, 1, and 2. And once again, this pseudocode. We do not do this in Python. So we are still discussing pseudocode for a little bit longer. Okay. If you want to initialize final grade sub 1, that's the second entry, not the first one. First one is sub 0, right? We start counting with 0 because in a lot of languages, arrays start with 0. Now in Fortran, it starts with 1. And in certain other languages, it might start with some other number. But 0 is preferred in C, Java, etc., Python, okay? So this would initialize the second entry with 87. What would this do? Again, this pseudocode, right? You recognize pseudocode because of start and stop. This says, give me an array of 5 entries, put zeros in all of them, each of them, right? And what does this say? This says index goes 0 to 4, right? And once again, this for loop syntax is not valid in Python, but it's okay in pseudocode. It says index goes 0 to 4 and a sub index. Please note the first time you go through this will be a sub 0. Second time you go through this, it will be a sub 1. And what's the last one? Right, not 5, right? So is that 5 entries? Yes. So for each one of those entries, you're going to enter a number and store it in that corresponding slot. Not the same slot, but index changes every time, right? So we'll see the picture in a minute. Now you want to print the reverse numbers in reverse order that you entered it. Therefore, this index starts from 4 and goes all the way down to 0, and this increment or decrement is 1, right? You go backwards by 1, and then you print it out. So any questions on the pseudocode, it's meant to do the following. Read 5 numbers, print them out in reverse order. Now, if you had to do this without an array, how many variables would you need? 5, because you would read A, B, C, D, E, or A1, B1, whatever, A1, A2, A3, A0, A1, whatever, to 4. So we avoid that. That's the advantage of arrays, right? We didn't have to change the variable because of the subscript. This is called a subscript. So this is still the pseudocode, and the flowchart looks like this. Initialize array elements to 0. A, B, C are the labels for these boxes, so we can do a trace, right? And we can skip some of them. For example, D is not that important, E is not that important. But anyway, this is the first loop. This is the second loop to print it out. And please note the index value starts with 4 and goes all the way to 0. And therefore the index is index minus 1 each time. Therefore it goes 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, right? Each time you print the array index, and here it's a get to read the data. So do you have any questions on the pseudocode or the flowchart? Hopefully they are understandable. If not, Python makes it even more precise, right? You can't have it two ways. So this is the situation if you're executing the flowchart at box A. I mean, the box is not mentioned here, but box is mentioned here, C, B, C, etc. Let's go back. See, B is the first time you have index equal to 0, and you've initialized all the entries to 0. So C, D, E are next, right? If you do the trace. So after you've done which box? Read the value entered from the, okay. Let's go back again, because unfortunately I don't have both slides. Once you finish D and you've read something from the terminal or keyboard, we are assuming the data is 14. Will it be stored here? A sub 0? Yes, because index is going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Next value will be stored here, not on top of this, right? You will not override this. That's the purpose of an array. Use up another location each time. So we are doing a trace now. So the next value will go here, the following one will go here, and so on. So after a while, this 14, 30, and these are zeros because we set them to 0 before the loop began, right? And little by little, please read the book. I've noticed that even though I do some examples, you have not read the book or something, so it shows up on the test. Anyway, after a while, this is 12, and finally this is 18. So you've put in the data as 14, 30, 15, 12, and 18 in that order. Now what are we going to print? In reverse order. So we're going to print 18 first, then 12, then 15, then 13, then 14. Therefore you reverse the loop. Go back to the flowchart, okay? This is a trace, very important for the last test, okay? Trace table for the first loop. It clearly tells you that A sub index is going to be this. But please note the index is changing. When it becomes 5, the loop stops because this condition is false, right? Okay, I'm not going to go through this because it's there. You can read over and over again from the book. This is for the second loop. You print out 18, 12, 15, 30, and 14. It says output here, right? In reverse order. Now, coming to the code. Python code is very simple. A equals square brackets means you're initializing a list to nothing, a 0 length list. Does that make sense? Right now, the list A is that, in other words, if I try and draw a diagram, there's nothing there. This doesn't exist. When A becomes 14, just one entry, then we have A sub 0 equal to 14. That's it. We don't have any A sub 1 yet. So you're building the list little by little. What I suggest is put a print statement here after the append and see how, just put print A. See how it grows. Can you not do that? Print A to print the whole array or list. And this says range is 0 to 5, so actually it goes through 4, up to 4, right? I goes up to 4 or 5 times. So you read the data, convert it in number, put it in X, ordinary variable, then append. A.append X means put it at the end, right end of the list. So you're collecting data. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 18 first? No, it's 14 first, I'm sorry. This is the output of the second loop. So you read 14 first, and that's the array or list at that time. What happens when you type 30? Well, this grows a little bit. From this, it grows to A sub 0 and A sub 1. And the two entries are 14 for the first one, and what's the other number? 30, is it? Thank you. So little by little, if you do the trace, the list becomes what you put in order, and this is the last one, A sub 4, and is that 18?
Yeah.
Etc. Thank you. So we've read in all the data. Will this work if we made this 100? Will you read in 100 values? Yes, no problem. That's the advantage of using arrays. Otherwise, you'll have to change the program and write 100 different variables and try and print them out in the correct order over here. But this says very simply, there should be a space after for and between I, just like this loop. For I in range 4, minus 1, minus 1, what does that mean? It starts with 4, this is the increment or decrement, minus 1, next value is 3, the next value is 2, then it's 1, and then it's 0. We don't really do it for minus 1, right? Just like this was not done for the value 5. You do it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So how difficult is it to type this program, run it, and see what it does? And then put the print A to see how the array or list grows, right? In Python, there's a lot of flexibility. Lot of other languages do not have lists. They have just an array which is given all the space in one step. So we can't do that in Python. You can do it, but it's complicated. You'll have to initialize each entry to 0, 0, 0, 0, etc. This is the easiest way to make the array or list. Any questions? And this is print subscript I, right? A sub I. Not the whole array. Print one element at a time. So you can print the whole array with that statement, or you can print one element at a time, and this is the output. Are there any questions on this? Okay. This is about the simplest thing you can do. Read numbers and print them in reverse order. Can you modify this to read names? All you have to do is remove int from here, and X becomes a name, right? A string. Perhaps you have to put it in double quotes over here. I don't remember. Oh, in VisualLogic you do, but in Python you don't. I'll give you an example in VisualLogic also. Okay. Let's convert the previous problem to read in 10 values instead of 5. I'll skip that, but here's the pseudocode. You can go through it later. All we have done is changed 5 to 10. That's about it. And 4 to 9 over here. Now, please note this minus 2. You're printing every other number in the array, not all of them. Okay? So go through this, please. It's very similar. And this is a flowchart. And there's no Python because we want you to work out the Python, which is trivial. Okay. This is more useful than the other example. Print the smallest value in a user entered array. This should be part of the comment. Okay, stop, that means it's pseudocode, and this is the pseudocode. Let me just very briefly go through it. I won't go through it in detail. This says give me an array of size 10, that means subscripts which are valid are 0 through 9, right? Initialize all of them or each of them to 0. Index is set to 0, that's an ordinary variable, and you're reading in the data. You read in 10 numbers in any random order. Then you assume the first one is the minimum, okay? A sub 0 is picked as the minimum. Then you go through the rest because index is 1 through 9. And if you come across a smaller one, then you save it in min. That's the logic here. And then this end if should be a little bit here to the right. Anyway, the end while shows you where the while loop ends. So index gets index plus 1, that means you're going through the rest, 9 of them. And then finally you print min. Now this takes a little bit of effort to understand, but let me get to the trace in a minute. This is the flowchart which I'll skip over. There's nothing difficult about it. Just focus on this part of the flowchart. That's the harder part. And this is the Python program. So you start out with a null array or null list. It's called a null list because it has nothing in it. And then index goes 0 to 9, right? It doesn't touch 10. Therefore it goes through 10 times, and each time it goes through, you read a number, convert to an integer, put in next, then append it to the array. So when you put in 72, the list is of size 1, A sub 0 is 72. Next time through, the list is of size 2, A sub 0 is 72, A sub 1 is 95, etc. When you're done with it, you pick the smallest one as A sub 0. In other words, you pick 72 as the smallest, put it in min. That's an ordinary variable. Go through the rest. So it goes 1 through 9, right? And if you come across another which is smaller, then min gets that. Therefore, 95, when you come to 95, is that smaller than what you have in min? It's not. When we come to 56, it is smaller. So you say 56 in min. It is very worthwhile doing a trace for this. Now, or if you are confused, can you not always put a print min here to print out what min looks like? Yes. You can print out index also, you can print out A also, the whole array, or A sub index to see which entry you're looking at. When you come to 84, min already is 56, so you're not going to save 84. When you come to 93, nothing happens because the flowchart is that way, right? See, nothing happens if you come across something larger or equal. Only if you come across something smaller, you save it. Anyway, it's very worthwhile understanding this fully. Okay, when you come across 45, min is 56. Do you save 45 in min? Yes. When you come across 69, min is already 45, so you don't save it. When you come across 35, you save 35 in min. You just go through this logic here. And when you come across 25, same thing, you save, because this will be true, you save 25 in min. When you're done, min is printed out and it's 25. Now, I can run this, but you can run it just as easily, right? So I'm not going to run it. I'll run 3 other programs and I'll show you VisualLogic for some of those. Now, two-dimensional arrays look like this. In Python, they're more general. In fact, because it's a list of lists, okay? And therefore, it won't be on the test. It's a little bit more complex. But in the very first entry, we have 2 things. We have a string and a number. In the second tuple, it's called, or that's why I'm not going to confuse you with more terminology, but we have 2 columns and 2 rows. Can you add a third row here, just with an append? Certainly. So it's a little bit harder to visualize, and therefore we are skipping the Python also. But how do you declare it in pseudocode? Name of the array, number of rows, number of columns, like that. Okay? And if you initialize it, the syntax is this. Now, if you wish to try it out, please do. No one's going to stop you, but this is not part of the homework, okay? For example, if you want to initialize an array which looks like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that, what will this do? Array, that's the number of rows, right? 3 rows. And number of columns, 2 columns. So actually the number of the row is 0, 1, 2, okay? It's a little bit confusing. And the number of the column is 0, 1, right? So this will initialize the first row, this will initialize the second row. So pictorially, do you understand what we are doing here? And once again, this pseudocode, it's not any particular language, it's not C++ or Java, okay? Okay, what will this pick out? Row 1 is this one, right? Because this is row 0. And column 0, therefore it will pick out 3, right? And print it. So if you want more experience, go for it. But I'm not going to ask you any questions which are 2-dimensional arrays. That's a little bit tougher, okay? You'll see plenty of this in Java 135, possibly in 145, etc. In fact, they stop at arrays. After covering the basics in Java, for loops, while loops, if statement, sort of a repeat of 120. I don't see why they should do the same stuff over, and they stop at arrays. They don't even do functions, they don't do graphics, that's 145. I used to teach it about 6-7 years ago. So here's the self-check. How many rows? We have 2 rows and 3 columns. Therefore, you, in pseudocode, mention that it has 2 rows and 3 columns, and that's how you initialize it. Or you can initialize it with get statements, right? Read it from the keyboard. So what will this do? It'll print from row 1 and column 1, so it'll print 5, right? And once again, 2-dimensional arrays are not going to be on the test, and higher dimensional arrays are still harder to understand and visualize. So multi-dimensional arrays you can ignore, okay? They are higher than 2 dimensions. 3 dimensions is not the maximum. Can you have arrays which are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dimensions? Yes, okay? But they become more and more complex, or at least you can't understand it easily. It's like visualizing a 4-dimensional cube or something. Can be done, but it's harder. So that's it. I'm going to stop here, but I'll do 2 more things. Couple of examples in Python. They're already on the OneDrive right from the beginning of the semester. And the same example in VisualLogic, and then I'll come to the assignment, okay? So going back on, this Y, but okay, this code samples. Let's do it in Python first. These 3 are the sample programs, and they're very simple, very short also. Let's open it with idle. I hope it's version 3.0 or above. 2.7.8. It works the same way, but the print statements give a little difficulty. This will print it differently. You don't need parentheses in version 2.7.8. But let's run it. Okay, what are we doing here? Enter size. Okay, so I'm allowed to enter the size of the array. Let's make it 10 or something. So now it's going to read 10 numbers, and each time through the loop it's going to print the whole list. Array list we use interchangeably. So let's put in some data. I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4. It's easier to visualize. So the array is right now, or the list right now is that. Put in 2, it's growing. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Any questions so far? I mean, the final list is this. If I want to pick out 6, which subscript will I use? It starts with 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'll use a sub 5. And therefore, this prints everything backwards, doesn't it? Please note it starts with n minus 1. If we had entered 10, this is 9. And goes all the way to 0. The minus 1 is not touched because the for loop syntax is such. like n is not done, right, up to n minus 1, which is 9. And this is the increment or decrement in this case. So do you have any questions on this? I'll do this in VisualLogic in a couple of minutes, okay? Because I've not done any example so far in that. Then let's do array sub 2. Here also it reads 5 numbers, prints the squares in reverse order. So it's a very good idea to trace this and see what it does, okay? Therefore I'm not going to run it. It defeats the purpose of doing a trace, right? But you can run it eventually and it'll print the squares. That means whatever I put in as data, it'll square that and print it out in reverse order. Okay, let's do this one. Print data in reverse order. Reverse of the way it is read. Same thing as number 1, so I'm going to skip that. Let's go to VisualLogic and do one of them and then maybe the second one. So where's VisualLogic? Somewhere here. Here it is. Thank you. Okay. My eyesight's pretty poor, especially when the screen's so high resolution. I do not have VLSig file demo mode. Okay. Now in VisualLogic, the syntax is more traditional, more like an assignment, C++, Java, etc. Make array is the statement. You got to ask for an array. Let me just compare it to this, edit with idle, so we can follow the code, right? Okay. How do you ask for an array of size 10, let's say? What you do is edit it and say my array name is what? A, right? Capital A. So I type in A here and upper bound is 9, right? Because it's 0 through 9, right? 10 entries. And again, look at VisualLogic manual. It's been there on the Y drive for a while. Okay, now we have 10 entries. Now, do we need a for loop? Yes. Oh, we need to initialize it? We don't need to worry about it because whatever we input as data will override the 0 anyway. Don't worry about initialization. So this is the for loop, edit it, and the name of the variable is I, right? Index is I. And initial value is what? 0. And the final value is 9, not 10. 0 through 9 is 10 entries, right? And step size is +1. For the second loop, this will be -1, right? Okay, and inside the loop, what do we want to do? We want to read in something. Now, there's no append in VisualLogic, but this is what you do. Edit. You write A sub I. I don't remember if it uses square brackets. We'll find out in a minute. See, I wrote the wrong thing. A subscript I should get whatever we read in. Let's test it out so far. We will forget about the rest of it right now. So begin and run it. I always do that. I do a little bit at a time. So input the first value, let's say 1. Input the second value, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. It's done. It did not print them out because we just don't have the second for loop, right? I'll ignore these two statements. Don't need to print it out yet. And the second loop will print it out anyway. So we need another for loop. Edit it. And the variable name can be anything. It doesn't have to be the same as this one. It can be J, for example. Traditionally, of course, since I is not being used anymore, we'll reuse it. And initial value is going backwards, 9 to 0. Step is -1, right? So I put a minus sign here, and okay. Then, do we need a print over here to match this? Yes. Output. Okay, right click, edit, and the output expression is what? A sub I. And lowercase a, uppercase a makes no difference in VisualLogic. It's the same variable. Okay, now I'll put in console mode because it's easier to understand. Okay, console mode for this also. So this is exactly the same as this logic except for one thing. Here you make the array once and for all of size 9 or actually 10. The largest subscript is 9, the smallest one is 0, so 10 entries. I did not do this part. I did not ask for the maximum size of the array. I don't know, I don't remember if you can make a variable size array in VisualLogic. Can I read the value of n and ask for an array of size n minus 1, actually the largest n? I don't know. It doesn't matter because I fixed the value of n as 10. Okay, let's go and execute this from the beginning. Please type in a value for a. Okay, so I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3, 4 just to keep things clear. And 10. Okay. Now I did print it out, but not very neatly. This 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, all on one line, up to 1. So let me modify this just a little bit by putting an enter over here. Do you remember that? It's in the VisualLogic manual. By just doing that and redoing the trace or whatever execution, it does the same thing and it's in reverse order, right? So it has worked correctly. Now let me run it one more time with random data. It's a little bit harder to remember all that, but I'll put the numbers in random order. 14 minus 5, etc. 0, it makes no difference. 13 minus 12, 9, that's 6 numbers so far. Minus 77, 44, minus 33, and one last one, 55. So are these in reverse order? They are. So the flowchart is very general. It takes positive or negative numbers. It makes no difference. It fills the array. Is it worth tracing through this by hand and seeing what it's doing? I think so. And this one already has the print A. If you run it, I think I ran it already. You can always put the same data as I put into the VisualLogic program right here and see if you get the same type of output. It should be the same. Any questions on this example? Okay, let's do the last one and then we'll stop. I'll just discuss Fibonacci numbers very briefly. I think it was array 3. Yes. No, this wasn't the one. It was array 2. Because it had the squares in it, I'm more interested in that. It's a bit similar to what we are doing for the assignment. It says, read in 5 numbers, print the squares in reverse order. So this just does the reading, nothing else, same as before. This does the printing in reverse order and it's calculating the square, is it not? Over here. So if we run it, in fact, this would be a good exercise for you to do right now in VisualLogic. I'm going to put in 5 random numbers. Okay, this is the last one. So what do you expect as output? Can you predict what this loop will do? Will it not print out 64 first, 8 square? And then the next thing that it prints out will be 99 square, then plus 25 because square of minus 5 is plus 25. Then 16 and then the square of 18, whatever it may be. So as soon as I hit enter, should do that. Okay, 98 over 1 is the square of 99 and 324 should be the square of 18. And I'm not going to do the VisualLogic, it's sort of an in-class assignment. If you do it in the next 10 minutes, I forgot to get the candy. You get a candy, like in school, right, KG? No, I'm kidding. Okay. Save changes, we can't save the changes. So the last thing I'm going to do is explain Fibonacci series and stop. Do you have any questions on any of these examples? Now it's very worthwhile going through the same set of examples, the 3 programs on the Y drive, array 1, array 2, whatever the names were. And let me just explain this on the board, because the assignment is for you to do the same thing in VisualLogic and in Python. Okay, so listen to this carefully, because I'm not going to repeat it unless you ask me to. Fibonacci series. First of all, who was Fibonacci? Does anyone know? Mathematician. He lived about 200 years ago in Pisa, city of Pisa, Italy. I don't know if he was responsible for the Leaning Tower or not, but he lived there. Okay, and he's a very, very well-known mathematician. He said, if you have 2 rabbits and they reproduce in a month, let's say, how many will you have? The sum of these 2. And a month later, you'll have the sum of these 2, etc. So you keep adding very rapidly, and I'm giving you part of the series. You add the previous 2 numbers to get the next one. So the algorithm is very clearly written on this piece of paper. Okay? Please note that the first 2 numbers are ones, the following numbers are the sum of the previous 2 numbers. You cannot do it any other way. You have to follow the procedure, okay? Fill up the array first and then print in reverse order. So how difficult is that? The first 2 numbers are ones. You got to initialize the array by hand, manually. But calculate this by adding the 2 previous numbers, calculate this by adding the previous 2, and so on. So what comes next? 13. What comes next? 21. What comes next? 34. And the next one is 55. Is that the 10th one? 4, 4, yeah. So the correct output should be 55, 34, etc., 1 and 1. Do that in both VisualLogic. It's easier because you have the make array statement. And then in Python. The Python program is 5 lines long. Yes, please?
Do you want them on the same line or on separate lines?
Makes no difference to me. As long as it's legible. I mean, don't do it like I just did the VisualLogic. If you do this, I can't understand it. I don't know what the values are, right? Is it 11 or is it 1, comma 1? So at least put a comma if it's on the same line, okay? To separate the values. Any other questions? We are done. 45 minutes, not too bad.